Hello and welcome to L2R. I'm Kinaesthesia, and today I'll be going over the strategy for Atramedes on heroic difficulty. This guy's led a rough life. After having his sight stolen from him in a lab experiment gone wrong, Atramedes was forced to live a life of sorrow and self-pity. None of the other dragons wanted to be his friend in Blind Dragon School, and he never got to be the one hiding during games of hide and seek. Look, Atramedes is all grown up now, and if you think he's going to let a little hindrance like blindness get in his way, well, you better watch out. Atramedes is a fairly simplistic fight. There are two phases that cycle back and forth in a unique mechanic known as the soundbar. The boss himself has around 103 million HP, and on heroic mode, obnoxious fiends will spawn throughout the fight with around 230,000 HP each. You'll want to bring one tank, 6 to 7 healers, and a balanced DPS makeup. At the start of the fight, each player will gain the sound bar. This bar represents your character's sound and will rise when hit by different abilities throughout the fight. Just imagine every time you're hit by something, your character screams. If any player's soundbar reaches 100%, they will be targeted and killed by Atramedes. Almost every ability the boss uses will increase the soundbar if hit by it. There are gongs lining the outside of the room that will reset the entire raid soundbar when used. These will also afflict the boss with vertigo, a debuff stunning him and causing him to take 50% extra damage for 5 seconds. In Phase 1, Atramedes will remain on the ground. He has no frontal breath, cleave, or tail lash, all of which are abilities that you'd expect, not only from a dragon, but especially a blind dragon. He does still have abilities to watch out for. His primary Phase 1 ability is Sonar Pulse. This sends out multiple discs of sonar energy from Atramedes toward the outside edge of the room. Coming into contact with these discs will cause minor arcane damage, but increase the player's soundbar. Throughout this phase, the boss will also use Modulation, an AoE ability that hits all players for moderate to heavy arcane damage and increases each player's soundbar. Sonic Breath is a targeted frontal cone ability that will track a random raid member for around 5 seconds. Being hit by the flames will cause the player to take moderate fire damage and increase their soundbar. Searing Flame is a channeled ability cast during the ground phase that ticks for increasing fire damage every second for 8 seconds. This spell is interrupted by hitting a gong to cause vertigo. On heroic modes, obnoxious fiends will spawn occasionally in Phase 1. These small mobs have around 230,000 HP and are not vulnerable to damage until their phase shift buff has dropped. Once these mobs attach themselves to a player, they will begin to use the obnoxious ability to increase the player's sound. Shortly after using Searing Flame, Atramedes will take to the air to begin Phase 2. During Phase 2, Atramedes will attack from the air. His primary ability in this phase is Sonar Bomb. These are like the Sonar Pulse rings from Phase 1, but are now being shot down at you from above. They deal moderate arcane damage and increase sound. He will also occasionally launch Sonic Fireballs, dealing moderate fire damage to all players hit. The true challenge of Phase 2 is Roaring Flame Breath. Atramedes fixates on a random player and chases them with a targeted flame breath. This breath deals moderate fire damage and increases sound. Additionally, the breath will speed up over time, eventually becoming too fast to outrun. Using gongs during this phase will cause the breath to cease following its current target and begin following the player who hit the gong instead. This phase will last a little over a minute before Atramedes lands for another ground phase. In Phase 1, Atramedes should be tanked in the center of the ring. Have the ranged and healer stack in a loose group on one side of the boss. Assign one healer, or one DPS and one healer, to stay near the gongs for when they need hitting. Staying somewhat grouped up will make healing through Modulate and Searing Flame more manageable. Players will still need to move to dodge Sonar Pulse rings, but should remain in this loose group. When Sonic Breath is cast, the player targeted will need to move out of the group. It's best if players understand the correct way to run prior to the pull. For example, if the player targeted by Sonic Breath always runs right, then the rest of the raid knows to move left in order to avoid being hit. When the obnoxious fiend spawns and becomes vulnerable, all players should quickly switch to attack it. Ranged DPS and healers with fiends on them should run into melee range so it can be cleaved down. It should die extremely quickly if all DPS switches to it immediately. The deadliest phase 1 ability is Searing Flame. This spell can only be interrupted by using one of the gongs, and it must be interrupted within the first 1 or 2 ticks of the channel. Any later and the damage can quickly become unhealable. Have the player in charge of ringing gongs ready to hit it the instant the channel begins. If done successfully, the raid will take minimal damage. This is also a good time to use raid cooldowns such as Aura Mastery or Power Word Barrier. If the raid took higher than normal damage from Searing Flame, use a Tranquility or Divine Hymn to help heal players up quickly. A Modulate will usually follow Searing Flame, meaning the raid needs to be healed back up fast. Shortly after Searing Flame, the boss will fly into the air to start Phase 2. In Phase 2, we split the raid into 4 groups and assign each group to a corner of the room. Move into the positions immediately as Atramedes is still taking off. The key to surviving Phase 2 is never stop moving. The abilities used in this phase are too fast to rely on reaction alone, and unless your character is already moving, you will be hit or caught by them. Try to continuously strafe around a small area to avoid sonar bomb. This is made easier by restricting players from moving through each other, as doing this can cause players to inadvertently run into each other's sonar bomb. Heal through the damage dealt from sonic fireballs and quickly move out of the roaring flames it spawns. The most important ability to handle in Phase 2 is Roaring Flame Breath. The instant a player is targeted by this ability, they should use or be given any kind of speed buff. Sprint, Blink, or anything similar is a good choice. Priests with Body and Soul are particularly helpful and should be spread around the room if available. Use these speed boosts to kite the breath around the room, but remember that it speeds up over time. Before being caught, a person assigned to ring gongs should hit it to redirect the breath to their self. This player will kite the breath for the remainder of the phase. If done correctly, Atramedes will land before the breath catches the second player. Body and Soul and Leap of Faith can both be very helpful for kiting the breath, but players should actively use their own movement increasing cooldowns to further the gap between themselves and the breath. When Atramedes lands, Phase 1 will repeat again. This fight cycles through Phases 1 and 2 until the boss dies. The key is to stay alive and not run out of gongs. This encounter is not overly difficult, but staying alive can prove to be quite a challenge. Remember that survival is more important than DPS here, and stay focused on avoiding as many abilities and as much damage as possible. Thanks for checking us out here at L2R. We hope this guide was helpful, and we'll see you at the next boss.
I wasn't feeling so good. I just didn't feel like playing anymore. So I went home, and I got all comfy and cozy and all scrunched up in front of my phonograph.